Okay, so hello everybody, and thank you for joining us and participating in this event, this really important event. So first of all, I would like to introduce you Camera on Campus and the great work that this organization do. By the way, like if suddenly I don't sound clear enough, I would like you to write me down. So I will say the thing again. So Camera on Campus work all over the world, in the US, in Canada, in Israel, all over the world. And Camera, what it does, it provides guidance in finding and connecting with speakers on films, planning and creating events, funding student groups, and addressing Middle East distortions in campus publication and in classroom teachings. Students all over the world are providing with the support for bravely and publicly defending Israel against hostility and distortions on campus, also in the US, but also in other places. As we can see, with all this organization and people telling lies on Israel, our mission is to give a bright and a clear voice, a voice of truth. And what we need to do with this voice, we need to empower it. So also other students around the world will have the truth. So again, I really appreciate the fact that all of you came today and will come here to hear a clear voice from someone who really had been through apartheid. So for most of you who doesn't know, my name is Yohay. I'm a Canada Fellow for Israel in Gurion University in the Negev. So first of all, good evening, good morning, and good afternoon for our audience from Israel, South Africa, UK, and the US. Today we're going to talk about the apartheid in South Africa, the Tega system of legislation regime that segregates and discriminates non-white people in South Africa. And not only Black people, also Indians and people that came from East Asia. I can say personally that after viewing a pro-BDS event on November, I was really overwhelmed of all these people who were associating Israel with apartheid. And for me, I felt really sad about it because only thing about this event was only telling lies and only telling lies and that stuff about Israel instead of focusing on how really to help the Arabs and the Palestinians. For me, I can really proudly say that Israel has been, for me and my family, and also others, a place to escape against a giant wave of anti-Semitism. Israel isn't really a state that wants to make a separation between Jews and also other populations. We really want a brighter future for our children to obtain it now and the future. So I would like to introduce you our amazing speakers, Klaas from South Africa, who will speak about his journey and his special connection with Israel. So a little bit about Klaas bio. Klaas, I hope I say it correctly. Klaas Mokgomole is a law graduate from Wits University in Johannesburg, South Africa. Klaas coordinates the organization Africans for Peace. Is a collective of independent students, scholars, and activists who bring an African lens to the global debate on peace and stability in Africa and around the world. Klaas was born in a small village called Mohalenberg. Sorry if I'm saying it wrong again. Sunnyside in Limpopo province. Klaas is active in politics since the age of 16. Klaas joined the Congress of South African Students in his region and served on his high school representative council for learners. While studying law at Wits University, Klaas joined with Wits branch of the African National Congress Youth League and served on the Wits Student Representative Council, the Wits Law Students Council, and the Wits Sport Council, among others. Klaas believes that whenever you set your mind on something, you can achieve it. He's the founder of the Brainwasher Sports Academy, consisting of netball, athletics, and soccer. So, first of all, about the event, I would like to ask all of you to turn your cameras on. And also, we put some Q&A. I also urge you to ask questions because it's a really great opportunity to learn more about the differences between South Africa and Israel. So we put a Q&A in order to write questions down. And I'm sure you all enjoy the event and also learn a thing or two about it. So without further ado, I would like to let Klaas speak. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that excellent introduction. Don't feel bad because you mispronounced my name. I also can't pronounce Israeli names. It's always a difficult task for me to pronounce some other countries' names, so I wouldn't judge you. So my name is Klaas Mokgomole. I'm from the northern part of South Africa. I'm from a province called Limpopo. It's in the northern part of South Africa. So today I'm going to speak about a few things. So my story is going to be divided into three. So I'm going to talk about my upbringing, growing up in the villages. I'm going to talk about my role in the leadership structures, being in the universities and the high school, and my life after I visited Israel in 2015. So as I spoke that I'm from the northern part of South Africa. I'm from an area called Sunnyside. It's just far away from a small town called Zanin. So I was raised by parents that grew up under apartheid. So I didn't grow up under apartheid. I was born like 4 years before apartheid ended. So I wasn't really old enough to comprehend it. But to this day, we can see the aftermath of apartheid. Even 26 years later, we can still see what damage the apartheid system or structures did actually to our country. So my parents, I was raised by two parents. Fortunately, both of them were working for the white government. My mother was a domestic worker. She was a nanny for a white man. So when she was pregnant in the year 1990, she didn't have a name for me. So I remember when I asked her the story, I asked her, why did you name me Klaas? And she was like, I didn't name you this. I didn't give you this name. You were given this name by my previous boss, because the job was to take care of the white guy's kids, was to make sure that she cleans the house, she does the laundry for the guy and his family. So when she was pregnant in 1990, the white guy who was her boss went to her and asked her, what's the name of your child? And she gave him ideas that I'm going to name him after one elder person that passed on a few years back. That's how we normally name people in South Africa. We take names from the previous guys that have lived and they give you the name. And she was like, look, I'm going to name him after a guy that lived like 3 generations back. And the white guy was like, no, I'm going to give you a name for the child. And he said, he gave my mom the name. He said, I'm going to be named Klaas. Then my mother didn't have a choice, because she was either to accept the name or she was to lose the job. So because she didn't have any other option, she had to actually agree to use the name Klaas. So when I was born, I was named Klaas. So that's how most of the things happened during apartheid. Like even when Nelson Mandela got the name Nelson, he went to his school, a primary school, and the teacher couldn't really pronounce the name Rolihlahla. So that's why they ended up naming him Nelson. So most of the blacks in South Africa during that time, they were named after, they were given religious names, or they were just given white people names without understanding what the name meant. So because of apartheid, my mom obviously had to be a domestic worker. I had to work for a white person. at that time. So because she couldn't go far in school, so she was limited during her time. So she wasn't allowed to go to a further grade. So she was only allowed to do until like the 4th grade or the 4th standard in primary. So she wasn't allowed to even go to high school or even go to a college. So that's why things happened that way. So I've always been interested in politics because of the stories that my mother told me that when she was growing up, they were not allowed to do a number of things. So that motivated me to be an activist. So when I was in high school, I joined the COSAS, Congress of South African Students. So that group, what they used to do was to make sure that we take care of the school politics. For example, in high schools, when there are no textbooks, when there's no like good infrastructure, when we don't have classrooms, that political group of young students was to make sure that we get this thing. So we'll make sure that we write letters to the government. We'll make sure that we protest or we have marches to the government to make sure that they give us these things. Because it's sometimes they made it normal for students in the rural areas to not get sort of textbooks or to not get a proper infrastructure to study. So as part of that group, again, I joined the African National Congress, the youth wing of that, the Youth League. African National Congress is the political organization that Nelson Mandela belonged to. So I joined that organization because I believed that is the right organization to bring about changes in our community. So I had ideas about the future, about how we can develop our communities. Like, for example, in the rural areas, there's no, like most of the places in the rural areas, we don't have electricity, there's no shelter. The infrastructure is actually very bad. So I believed that at the time, by joining the African National Congress, I will be able to actually bring about solutions, or bring about ideas that we can actually develop our area. So because of my activism in high school, when I passed my matric, my last grade in high school, I went to Wits University. When I got to Wits University, I continued with my activism. I joined again the African National Congress, the Youth League of it there. When I was still on campus, I joined the Law Student Council. I was part of the Representative Student Council as well, the SRC. Other places, they call it student governance. So when I was on campus, I was very active in politics as well. I became active in politics because I believed that if you want things to be sorted on campus, you need to be part of a group, and a group that have the same ideas that actually can develop the campus space. So I was part of that. So during my time on campus, I also became a member of the BDS, Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions. So I became a member of BDS because they told me, and obviously my fellow leaders on campus, that Israel is an apartheid state. And obviously, they showed us videos, they showed us PowerPoint presentation from, like they developed a sort of a strong PowerPoint presentation showing how things are happening in the Middle East, showing us a number of things. So I joined the BDS because I wanted to make sure that I bring about solution in the Middle East. So as a Black person in South Africa, I wouldn't want any other Black person anywhere in the world to suffer the injustice of apartheid. So I made sure that I joined the group. And we had marches in South Africa whenever the South African Union of Jewish Students will want to host events on campuses. We'll always disrupt those kind of events. Whenever the South African Jewish Board of Deputies will have events, we'll march. I remember when Barack Obama came to South Africa, we also had a protest against him, a march against him, because we believed that it was actually giving Israel ammunition to actually kill the Palestinians, especially the babies. So I was very actively involved in the BDS because of the things that they told me. I was told that Israel is an apartheid state. Being a Black South African, I wouldn't want anyone anywhere in the world to suffer the injustice of apartheid. So I can tell you that there are a number of things that happened when I was on campus. And later on, when there was a point where we boycotted an event that was a Jewish event. They brought an Israeli-born German pianist to come and perform on our campus. He came there, we boycotted the event, and the university decided to charge us. Obviously, we went through disciplinary hearing and I was found guilty. Me and my other leaders on campus were found guilty. Then later on, after being found guilty, we had to do community service and stuff like that. We were nearly expelled. Then that's when I started asking myself a number of questions. And I wanted to know if really Israel is an apartheid state. I did research on my own, actually spoke to people on campus. I watched videos, I read books written by a number of people like your Noam Chomsky, your Benjamin Pogren, Alan Dershowitz, a number of books, but still I couldn't get the answers that I needed. Then it happened that in the year 2015, there was an opportunity offered to me to try go to Israel on an educational trip. So obviously I went to Israel to want to learn about the issues on the ground. But at the time when I went to Israel, I was still a member of the BDS. I wanted to know what's happening in Israel. I wanted to know, is this apartheid they're talking about? Because I sacrificed my academics, I sacrificed my degree, my qualification for this struggle of the people of Palestine. So we flew to Israel. I can tell you that we went to Israel. We spent almost 8 days in Israel. We drove all over Israel. Like we went from Nazareth to Tel Aviv, Jerusalem. We even went to the West Bank. Like we went to Rawabi, Ramallah, went to Bethlehem, went to a number of places. And we kept speaking to young people on the ground. We had discussions with young people on the ground. And I can tell you that as a South African, I was very impressed by the ideas the young people on the ground had. They wanted to see their country developing. They wanted peace. They wanted people to work together. The things that BDS was preaching in South Africa were actually all lies because of the things that I saw in Israel. I can tell you that after my visit, that's when I realized actually that Israel's not an apartheid state. Let me just give you a summary of what apartheid was like. Apartheid was actually an architecture system of laws that was aiming at making sure that blacks and whites are segregated. They made sure that the schools and the hospitals, so there are different schools for blacks, there are different schools for the whites. There also are different hospitals for blacks, there also are different hospitals for whites. There was a law that was enacted called Group Areas Act. This law was made to make sure that areas, I mean, the land is divided, that blacks will stay in or live in a different area and whites will live in a different area. And obviously that came with privileges and stuff like that. So in an area where blacks were living, the conditions were very dire, that people were suffering. There was no sanitation, a number of things were not there in the black areas. I can tell you that even in prisons, the way black people were treated in prisons is not the same way the white people were treated in prisons. There was a law for that. Another law that was very famous was the law called Mixed Marriages Act. This law was to make sure that blacks and whites don't get married. So they made sure that they come up with that law so that they don't have an interracial society. For example, some of you will know a gentleman called Trevor Noah. So that's why he wrote a book that he was born a crime. It's because of this law. He was not allowed. His mother and the father, who was white, his mother's black, the father is white, were not allowed to be in one union. They were not allowed to be in a relationship. So as a result, they defied the law. They were in a relationship and Trevor Noah was born as a result. So that's why he loves saying that he was born a crime. In South Africa, we call them coloreds, but in other parts of the world, they call them mixed races. So that's why he loves saying he was born a crime. Moving into the education sector, there was a law called Bantu education. Bantu education was enacted for the Blacks. Blacks were only allowed to study things like woodwork, plumbing, religious studies, and they were not allowed to do things like physics, physical science, or accounting, or mathematics, because they said they were not good enough for that. So Blacks were actually taught to be servants. That's why when they went to school, they were taught all these things, that they can only be servants. They couldn't study to be a lawyer at the end of the day. They couldn't study to be an accountant or an engineer. So they could only serve under a white person. Then we can move into the lifestyle of entertainment. There were spaces where in theaters, Blacks were not allowed. In movie theaters, Blacks were not allowed. Moving into the beaches, Blacks were not allowed in some beaches. So there will be a dividing line and a board saying whites only or non-Europeans and stuff like that. Then I can tell you that when you move into politics, it was illegal for Blacks to actually form a political party. So they were not allowed to actually gather in numbers. It was a law that was enacted. I can tell you that in parliament at the time, we only had whites in parliament. So you call parliament Knesset. So all these things that I just mentioned, they show that Israel is not an apartheid state. For example, in Israel, we have Arabs and Jews in the hospitals. We have the Arabs and Jews in the same schools. We have Arabs and Jews living in all these areas. They share areas. You move to Tel Aviv, you are in Jerusalem, you see them, they share the areas. You have Arabs and Jews that are allowed to marry each other. This one's not religiously. We have Arabs and Jews studying in the same education system. We have Arab and Jews sharing the promenade in Tel Aviv. We wouldn't see that in South Africa. You move into the Knesset. You have Arabs and Jews sharing the Knesset. For example, you go into the Knesset, you have your Likud party, you have your blue and white party, you have your joint list party, which is an Arab party. Then obviously you have small parties like the Labour Party. So I can tell you that what we see organizations, what we see with these organizations such as BDS, you can see that they are actually using this apartheid narrative to actually go out there and spread lies. And by this, they're not bringing about solutions. I can tell you that there's no country in the world that is perfect. Israel is not perfect, South Africa is not perfect, the United States is not perfect, the UK is not perfect. But the question is, how can we bring about solutions to all these imperfections? Let's move into Israel. We need to, we as the young people, we need to find ways to bring about solutions in Israel. We need to find ways to bring about a peaceful resolution. But I can tell you that Israel is not an apartheid state. Let me give you an example. In South Africa, when there was apartheid, we only needed leaders to bring about peace. We needed leaders to bring about solutions to the issues that we were faced with. So it took leaders from both sides. It took a white person and a black person to sit down on a round table and negotiate and come up with peaceful resolutions. So that's what we need in the Middle East. We need leaders that are going to sit on a round table and negotiate. We need leaders that are going to sit on a round table and come up with peaceful resolutions that are going to benefit everyone. We don't need leaders that are going to be flying rockets from the south. We don't need leaders that are going to be very egocentric and forget about the people on the ground and only think about themselves. That's what we need. I'm actually going to stop there for now, so then I can take Q&As so that we can have an engagement in this dialogue.
Okay, thank you for this interesting talk. It was really interesting. And even for me, like I learned something new every day. So also this taught me new stuff. So first Klaas, I would like to ask you a personal question of mine before I go to the other Q&As. And my question is, what do you think that Arabs and also Palestinians can learn from what happened in South Africa? How can we use it? How can we benefit from what happened there?
So what Arabs and Palestinians can, Arabs, Palestinians, and Israelis can learn, it's the fact that for there to be progress or for there to be development, there needs to be a compromise. You need to compromise so that you can actually have a peaceful resolution. Number two, you're going to need leaders that understand the importance of a compromise. Also, the people on the ground need to take charge. The people in Israel, people in the West Bank, people in Gaza need to take charge, and they need to come together and make sure that they come up with solutions that are going to benefit themselves. The international community, all they can do is to actually come up with solutions or come up with suggestions, actually. They can only suggest things, but only the people on the ground understand the importance of the things that they need. We are not on the ground, we don't understand it fully. We can't comprehend it fully, but we can only understand it from a distance. So people on the ground need to actually come up with solutions for themselves and stuff like that. But it takes a compromise and it takes good leadership for that to happen.
Thanks for the question. Okay, so another question from the Q&A. Someone says, for Israel isn't an apartheid state, what can we learn from the example of South Africa to ensure that Israel provides an equal, peaceful life for all living in Israel, including the ones that live in the West Bank?
So I can tell you that it's going to take time. For example, I spoke about this in the beginning, that even apartheid sort of ended in 1994, because only in 1994, Blacks were allowed to go vote. A Black political party was allowed to be on the ballot paper. That's when only the ANC government was voted in and took power. To this day, we still have a number of Black people that are struggling. We still have a number of people that are unemployed. We still have a number of Black people that are dying because of gun violence, a number of things. It takes time. Change doesn't happen overnight. So what you can learn from South Africa is that you need to be very optimistic and you need to be very patient with the development. But obviously, Israel is not really an underdeveloped country. Israel is close to be a first world country because of the invasions that they come up with. So with Israel, the economy is actually growing faster comparing to the economy of South Africa. But what Israel can learn from South Africa is the patience South Africa had and the understanding and the compromise. There are a number of things that Blacks really wanted, but they couldn't get, but they still understood. There are things that white people wanted, but couldn't get, so they still understood. So they sort of compromise, so you can keep this, I'll keep this. But as long as at the end of the day, we're going to avoid civil war, we're going to avoid the bloodshed on the ground.
Thank you. Also, another question from the Q&A. How do you think we can teach people about the difference between the apartheid regime in South Africa and also the democratic regime in Israel? What do you think is really stopping people from seeing the difference between this?
So what happens is this, people, like we have this sort of, we are living in a generation of fake news, and people are, the fake news travel faster than actually real news. One other thing that you need to realize is that people are lazy these days to research. People are lazy to research, people are lazy to read. So people will just get information and take it at first hand. I remember when I was speaking to young people in California, Berkeley, we expect them to be open-minded students because of their students who are on campus, University of California, Berkeley. So you'll get to understand that actually this person is not well read, but already this person is convinced that Israel is apartheid. You'll ask them simple questions about apartheid. What is it that happened during the South African apartheid? And why do you draw a link between South Africa and Israel? And you can tell that this person is not really well read. People don't really research. So people don't want to read, people don't want to research. That's why people just think these things are the same. So I can tell you that they can never be the same. We can never be the same because in South African apartheid, we wouldn't have a black party in South African apartheid. We wouldn't have blacks voting. We didn't have a number of things that people in Israel are having. So you can tell that people are actually lazy to research. People don't want to go out there. So what we need to do is actually to educate them. That's what we need to do. We need to go out there and educate people. We need to come up with ways to make sure that people are informed and are getting the right information that is relevant to them.
Thank you. Do you think the media in South Africa really covers the Israel-Palestinian conflict? What do you think about it, and how does it do it?
All right, so the South African media, like generally in South Africa, we don't wake up and think, let me get that out of the way. We don't wake up every day and think about Israel and Palestine. We have our own issues. We have our highest crime rate. We have our gender-based violence. We have unemployment, high stats of HIV. So we have our own issues. There are times when we think about this. So there's a period normally in March where on campuses they love having what you call this Israel Apartheid Week or Israel Awareness Week during the period of March, or whenever there are issues in the Middle East that spark the international community. For example, when there was a protest in the Gaza, when there were flights that were flown into Israel, or when Hamas decided to fire rockets and stuff like that. I can tell you that the media will only report, but most of the media will take one-sided view. So they will always report on what happened. They'll just show a baby dying in Gaza. They'll only show a building collapsing in Gaza. They won't really show the whole thing. So that's another problem that we are faced with. So they do report the things that we see there, but they won't really report the whole thing. They wouldn't really show the rockets that have been flown. They wouldn't really show everything. They're just going to show the IDF. They were just going to show the maybe the Iron Dome and stuff like that. So that's the problem that we are faced with. So there's sort of a biasness that comes from the South African media.
Thank you. How many Palestinians or people who support their cause really visited in South Africa in the apartheid regime? I mean, like, you have like an estimation, because many people are using South Africa to say that also Israel has an apartheid regime. So actually, these people, do you really think they actually visited in the South African apartheid regime?
I don't think so. I don't think people really visited. I don't think so. I think they just get the information from the people that are anti-Israeli. So don't forget that we have a number of anti-Israel organizations that are out there, that are spreading the lies, that are out there sort of just making sure that they're confusing the people. So I don't think people really visit the South African apartheid era or regime. So some people just read, but people actually get fed by the BDS and these other anti-Israel organizations.
Okay, so why do you think that the BDS movement attached itself to the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa? What do you think that the reason is?
Yeah, I beg your pardon, please repeat your question.
Sorry. Why do you think that the BDS movement, now you can hear me better?
Yeah.
Okay, so why do you think that the BDS movement attached itself to the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa?
I think it's simple. BDS is led by anti-Semitic people. So we sometimes take it for granted, and we cannot allow that to happen. So BDS is led by anti-Semitic people, and we need to actually expose that. Yes, they hide behind the whole thing of no, Israel's an apartheid state and stuff like that. But BDS in its entirety, if you check the policies, BDS in its entirety is actually anti-Semitic. And if we just take them for granted, we're going to regret it at the end. Remember like in 1930 something, some German leader once said he's going to kill the Jews, and people thought he was joking. Few years, 6 years later, he killed more than 6 million Jews. And people thought this guy was joking. So same thing with BDS. So we need to make sure that we discredit them. We need to make sure that we stop them before it's too late, because we know that they're very anti-Semitic.
Mm-hmm. By the way, there's a lot of talk about South Africa being a BDF stronghold. Is this true? And if so, how and why?
So South Africa it's the strongest BDS. Is a stronghold of BDS because of we are sort of the copyright holder. I love saying this. We are like the copyright holders of apartheid. We are the ones that understand apartheid proper. So BDS International will inject a lot of funding into BDS South Africa because of the Black South Africans will understand apartheid. So whenever you come to South Africa and you tell a Black person that there's apartheid somewhere in the world, that Black person is going to make sure that they react and make sure that they protest. You can protest against the Jews in South Africa. You can protest against, you can even sort of sanction Israeli companies that are trying to come and start business in South Africa. So that's the thing. So they targeted South Africa because we understand apartheid better. It's the same way the Jews understand Holocaust better. So if you want to say, spread lies, then say there's a Holocaust somewhere in North Africa, you have to target a place where there are a lot of Jews and say, look, there's Holocaust somewhere in Africa, because you know that the Jews will actually react and make sure that they come up with ways to stop that Holocaust. And you inject money into that area where there are a lot of Jews. Same thing. BDS International realized actually Black South Africans or South Africa in its entirety understand apartheid. We're going to inject a lot of funding there. And if we inject funding there, well, these guys are going to make sure that they help us in preaching our message against Israel.
Thank you. So now for our last question. I mean, we could talk all day about it because it's really interesting and there's like a lot to say about it. So the last question is, why do you think people who are mostly really ignorant about the Middle East join groups like BDS or even radical groups on a university campus? Someone says that he studied in UG, in the USC University of Texas, and somehow liberal campus environment, it tells like that mostly like ignorant people joins groups like BDS and also radical groups. What do you think about it?
It's because what we need to realize that BDS is very active and BDS is very well funded. BDS will have a program and will focus on campuses. They will go to university campuses and they will be there to preach. Their main goal is to preach anti-Israel. That's what they do. And you realize that there are no other group that are there to counter the BDS. Because if you check your Hillel, your camera on campus, your stand with us, their main goal is to speak about other things and not there to counter what BDS is doing. So BDS will have a say fest and will go then give flyers, will have talks, and students will attend, and BDS will reach these famous people to try to convince them to come and talk to students. Students will attend these events and stuff like that. So students will get attracted to what the BDS is preaching or the BDS message, and students will actually end up attend those kind of messages. At the end of the day, the students will just go with the flow without understanding. Understand? So if we are to have groups that are there to counter what the BDS is saying, we wouldn't really see this. For example, in South Africa, we have groups like Africans for Peace. They are on campuses to actually counter what BDS is saying. That's why now on campuses, there's no much BDS presence. Like we don't see the BDS members being very active on campus because of what the Africans for Peace are doing and other organizations are doing to make sure that we don't give BDS the space that they actually require to actually preach lies. So what we need to do, we need to have organizations going to campuses to actually clarify, to make sure that they stop the lies that are perpetuated or preached by the BDS.
Wow, the answer was amazing. Thank you, Klaas. Also,
I see other questions here about the biggest misconceptions.
Yeah, I wish we had more time for questions, but everyone feel free to ask me Klaas and Camera on Campus on Facebook, on our website, on Google. Feel free to ask us. We'll be more than glad to answer your questions. And also, one of the questions was, when Klaas is coming to Israel, because some people would really like to hang out with you. So hopefully when everybody will get the vaccine for the coronavirus, hopefully really soon. So Klaas, it was really inspiring. Thank you so much for giving us your perspective. Once again and again, so many people who really doesn't have a clue about the difference between what happened in South Africa and what is really happening in Israel. They just tell a lot of forces, and it's really good to hear a true voice of sanity. So thank Klaas, thank also Eitan and Camera on Campus for organizing this event. Thank you also for African for Peace. You're doing a great job for everyone. And again, feel free to connect us.
Okay. Yeah, guys, don't forget to check our Africans for Peace work. We have a website, www.africansforpeace.com. You can check the articles that we write. You can check the booklets that we put there. So there's a number of things that we actually post on our website. So just check there. There's more information about apartheid. There's more information about Africa as a whole. There are a number of things that we actually discuss with our young scholars on our website. Thank you for hosting me.
Thank you. So we also put the link in the chat if you want to check the website. And yeah, you're like doing explanation all over the world. It's amazing.
Thank you.